The bond of two sisters by choice. Once upon a time, in a quiet village nestled between rolling green hills, there lived two young women, Amina and Zainab, who were as inseparable as the roots of an ancient baobab tree. Their bond was not of blood but of shared dreams, laughter, and countless memories. The villagers often called them sisters, and it was easy to see why. Amina and Zainab did everything together, fetching water from the stream, cooking over the open fire, and whispering secrets under the starry sky. Amina was the brighter of the two, her confidence shining like the morning sun. She dreamed of leaving the village to find her place in the city, where opportunity sparkled in the lights of skyscrapers. She was ambitious, always talking about a life filled with adventure, success, and love. Her laughter was infectious, her presence magnetic. Zainab, on the other hand, was her quiet shadow, humble, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal. She listened more than she spoke and often marveled at Amina's boundless energy. Where Amina dreamed of more, Zainab was content with what life had given her, or so she told herself. Years passed, and one fateful day, Amina announced that she had secured a job in the bustling city. It was a moment of celebration for the village, but for Zainab, it was bittersweet. As much as she was happy for her friend, she couldn't ignore the gnawing fear that Amina's departure would change everything. "Don't worry, Zai," Amina had said, holding Zainab's hands tightly. "I'll come back for you. When I've made it, you join me. We'll conquer the world together." Zainab nodded, forcing a smile, though her heart whispered doubts. The city transformed Amina. Within a few years, she had blossomed into a successful, confident woman with a life Zainab could only imagine. She had a well-paying job, a beautiful apartment, and a new circle of friends. Despite her busy life, Amina never forgot Zainab. She called frequently, her voice brimming with stories of her achievements and excitement. "Sai, you won't believe it. I met someone," Amina gushed during one of their calls. Zainab listened quietly as Amina described Jibril, the man who had captured her heart. He was everything Amina had ever wanted, charming, kind, and successful. "I think he's the one," Amina said, her voice filled with joy. "And guess what? He proposed. I want you to be my maid of honor, Zai. You have to come to the city for the wedding." Zainab's heart sank. She was happy for Amina, truly, but her friend's words carried a painful reminder of how different their lives had become. While Amina thrived, Zainab remained in the village, teaching in a small school with meager pay and watching her own dreams fade into the background. She hesitated for a moment, then forced herself to respond. "Of course, Amina. I wouldn't miss it for the world." After the call ended, Zainab sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the cracked walls of her room. Amina's life seemed so far removed from hers now, like a dream she could never touch. A seed of envy began to take root in her heart, mingling with her love for her best friend. "Why her?" Zainab whispered to the darkness. "Why does everything always work out for her?" As the days passed, Zainab prepared for her journey to the city, her emotions a storm of excitement, fear, and something darker that she didn't want to acknowledge. She told herself she was happy for Amina, and maybe if she said it enough, she would believe it. But deep down, she knew her feelings were more complicated than that. The bond they had shared for so long was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Arrival in the city of dreams. The sun hung low in the sky as the crowded bus rumbled into the sprawling city. Zainab stared out of the window, her face pressed against the glass, marveling at the towering buildings and flashing billboards. Lagos was unlike anything she had ever seen. The streets were alive with honking cars, bustling pedestrians, and vendors shouting over one another to sell their wares. It was chaos, yet it had a rhythm, a pulse that made her heart race. When the bus finally stopped, Zainab stepped off hesitantly, clutching her small, warm bag tightly to her chest. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food, and the cacophony of voices felt overwhelming. She scanned the sea of faces nervously until she saw Amina waving excitedly from across the road. Dressed in a flowing dress and heels that clicked confidently against the pavement, Amina looked every bit the successful city woman. "Zai!" Amina called, rushing forward to hug her. "Welcome to Lagos." "Oh, I've missed you so much." Zainab smiled, holding her tightly. "I missed you too, Amina," she said, her voice soft. Amina led her to a sleek car parked nearby, and Zainab couldn't help but gawk. "This is yours?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. "Of course," Amina replied with a laugh. "Jibril insisted I upgrade. He says I deserve the best." She winked as she opened the door for Zainab. The drive to Amina's apartment felt like a dream. The roads were wide, the buildings gleaming, and everything seemed to sparkle under the city lights. When they arrived, Zainab's breath caught in her throat. The apartment building was tall and modern, with glass doors that reflected the night sky. Inside, the polished floors and soft lighting made her feel like she had stepped into a different world. "This is it," Amina said, unlocking the door to her apartment. The space was spacious and impeccably decorated, with plush furniture, abstract art on the walls, and large windows that offered a stunning view of the city. Zainab's eyes widened as she took it all in. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I know, right?" Amina beamed. "But wait, there's someone you have to meet." Before Zainab could ask who, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped into the living room. He was handsome, with warm brown eyes and a smile that was polite but reserved. "Zainab, this is Jibril," Amina said, taking his hand and pulling him forward. "My fiancé." "It's nice to meet you, Zainab," Jibril said, extending a hand. Zainab shook it awkwardly, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Nice to meet you too," she said quietly, her eyes flickering between him and Amina. The way Jibril looked at Amina was undeniable. His gaze softened whenever he spoke to her, and his touch lingered as though he couldn't bear to be apart from her for even a moment. Zainab couldn't help but notice the way they fit together, like two halves of a perfect whole. It was beautiful, but it stung. Over the next few days, Amina went out of her way to make Zainab feel at home. She took her shopping, showed her the city, and introduced her to her new circle of friends. But no matter how hard Amina tried, Zainab couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Everything about Amina's life seemed so far removed from her own. The apartment, the car, the clothes, even the way Amina carried herself, it was all a stark contrast to Zainab's modest life in the village. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the glittering city, Amina leaned back with a sigh of contentment. "You know, Zai, this is everything I've ever dreamed of," she said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "A great job, a wonderful man, and a beautiful home. Sometimes I can't believe it's real." Zainab forced a smile, but her chest tightened. She wanted to be happy for her friend, truly she did, but the words felt like a dagger. Amina's perfect life was a glaring reminder of everything Zainab didn't have. She thought of her tiny, run-down room back home, her meager salary, and the endless days that stretched into one another without promise or excitement. "You're lucky," Zainab said quietly, her eyes fixed on the city lights. Amina laughed, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Luck has nothing to do with it, Zai. You just have to work hard and believe in yourself. Who knows? Maybe one day you'll find someone like Jibril too." The words were meant to be encouraging, but they felt like salt in a wound. Zainab nodded, her smile wavering. Inside, something dark began to stir. It wasn't just envy, it was a sense of inadequacy that gnawed at her like a hungry beast. She told herself it was nothing, just fleeting jealousy that would pass. But as the days turned into weeks, the feeling only grew stronger, taking root deep in her heart. Zainab started to notice things she hadn't before, how Jibril's eyes lingered on Amina, how he always seemed to anticipate her needs, how he looked at her like she was the center of his world. It was a love Zainab had never known, and the more she saw it, the more she felt like an outsider looking in. No matter how hard Amina tried to include her, Zainab couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely a visitor in a life she would never have. And so, while Amina basked in her happiness, Zainab sat quietly in the shadows, her heart heavy with feelings she couldn't admit, not even to herself. A fracture in the perfect picture. The days in Amina's bustling apartment passed quickly, but for Zainab, time seemed to crawl. She spent her mornings helping Amina with chores and her afternoons quietly observing the life that had become a source of both fascination and torment. Amina and Jibril were inseparable, their love like a warm glow that filled every corner of the home. But Zainab, ever watchful, began to notice cracks in the perfect picture. It wasn't that Amina and Jibril were unhappy, far from it. They shared laughter, quiet moments of affection, and a mutual respect that Zainab envied. But like any couple, they had their disagreements. One evening, Amina grew frustrated when Jibril forgot to bring home the fabric she had asked for. "You never listened to me," she snapped, her arms crossed as she paced the living room. Jibril, calm as ever, apologized and promised to make it up to her. "I'm sorry, Amina. It slipped my mind. I'll get it first thing tomorrow." "It's not just about the fabric," Amina replied, her voice tinged with exasperation. "It's about paying attention to the little things. Sometimes it feels like you don't take me seriously." Zainab sat silently in the corner, pretending to scroll through her phone but listening intently. She filed the argument away in her mind, waiting for the right moment to use it. The next day, as she and Amina sat on the balcony sipping tea, Zainab brought it up casually. "You know, Amina, I noticed you and Jibril had a little disagreement yesterday. Are you okay?" Amina waved it off with a laugh. "Oh, that. It's nothing, Zai. Couples argue all the time. It's normal." Zainab nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I guess. But you're such a strong, independent woman, Amina. You deserve someone who understands you completely, who doesn't need to be reminded of what's important to you." Amina frowned slightly but shook her head. "Jibril does understand me. He's just forgetful sometimes. No one's perfect." "Of course," Zainab said, her voice soft and understanding. "I just hope he doesn't take you for granted. You've worked so hard to build this life. You deserve someone who appreciates every part of you." The words were carefully chosen, planted like seeds in Amina's mind. Zainab didn't push too hard, just enough to make her friend think. Over the next few weeks, she continued to sow doubt subtly. When Jibril was late coming home from work, Zainab would raise an eyebrow. "He's late again. You must be so patient, Amina. I don't know if I could handle that." When Amina mentioned Jibril's plans to hang out with his friends, Zainab would offer a small, innocent comment. "It's good he has time for his friends. I just hope he doesn't forget to make time for you." At first, Amina brushed off Zainab's remarks, confident in her relationship. But over time, the comments began to linger in her mind. Was Jibril really as attentive as she thought? Were their arguments a sign of something deeper? She found herself questioning things she had never doubted before. Meanwhile, Jibril started to notice Zainab's behavior. At first, it was small things, like how she always seemed to be around when he and Amina were having private conversations or how she casually dropped comments about their relationship. But as time went on, her actions became more overt. One evening, while Amina was in the kitchen preparing dinner, Zainab sat on the couch with Jibril, much closer than he was comfortable with. "Jibril," she said, her tone light and teasing, "you're lucky Amina is so forgiving. I don't think I've ever seen her upset for more than a few minutes. Jibril looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, Zainab said quickly, a sly smile playing on her lips. It's just that you're not as perfect as she makes you out to be. But don't worry, I think that's part of your charm. Jibril shifted uncomfortably, his gaze narrowing. Zainab, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think that's an appropriate thing to say. Zainab feigned innocence, her eyes wide. Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Just joking around. She stood and headed toward the kitchen, leaving Jibril unsettled. Later that night, Jibril decided to confront Amina. Amina, I need to talk to you about Zainab, he said as they got ready for bed. Amina looked up from her phone, surprised. What about her? Jibril hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I've noticed that she says things sometimes that make me uncomfortable. It feels like she's trying to stir up trouble between us. Amina frowned, setting her phone down. What kind of things? She keeps making comments about how you deserve better or how I don't appreciate you enough. And she's overly familiar sometimes. I don't like the way she acts around me. Amina's expression softened into a smile. Oh, Jibril, she's just joking. Zainab's harmless. You know she's like a sister to me. Maybe you're reading too much into it. Jibril sighed. I hope you're right. But please, just keep an eye on it. Something about her behavior doesn't sit right with me. Amina nodded, though she didn't take his concerns seriously. To her, Zainab was still the shy, loyal friend she had always known. She couldn't imagine her best friend having any ill intentions. But Zainab, emboldened by Amina's trust and Jibril's discomfort, began to test the boundaries further. She started finding excuses to spend time alone with Jibril, helping him with small tasks around the house, joining him in conversations that didn't involve Amina. Her tone was always sweet, her words wrapped in layers of innocent charm, but her intentions were far from pure. For Jibril, it became harder to ignore. The once warm atmosphere of the home now felt charged with tension, and he found himself dreading Zainab's presence. But Amina remained blissfully unaware, leaning on Zainab emotionally and dismissing Jibril's growing unease. Unseen by Amina, the fracture in her perfect picture was growing wider. And Zainab, driven by envy and bitterness, was determined to push it further apart. Betrayal in the shadows. Zainab's days in Amina's home had become an intricate dance of deceit, her charm and manipulation woven so skillfully that Amina never suspected her motives. On the surface, Zainab remained the doting friend, always ready with a kind word or helping hand. But beneath the facade, her jealousy festered, driving her to actions she would once have deemed unthinkable. Every interaction with Jibril became an opportunity for Zainab to plant seeds of doubt. Her tone was sweet, her words innocent, but they were carefully chosen to cast shadows over Amina's image. You must have the patience of a saint, Jibril, she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Amina's strong-willed nature can be a lot to handle. I sometimes wonder if she listens to you as much as she talks. Jibril stiffened, glancing at her. Amina and I understand each other. That's what matters, he replied, his tone clipped. Zainab smiled, tilting her head. Of course. You're a great match. I just hope she appreciates everything you do for her. It was comments like this, subtle, seemingly harmless, that began to weigh on Jibril. He tried to brush them off, but her words lingered in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. The growing tension in the household didn't go unnoticed by Amina, but when she questioned Jibril about his mood, he dismissed it, not wanting to upset her further. Still, the situation reached a boiling point one evening when Jibril caught Zainab crossing a line. As he sat alone in the living room, scrolling through his phone, Zainab entered, wearing a dress that clung to her figure. She moved closer than necessary, leaning over to hand him a glass of water. Her hand brushed against his, lingering for just a moment too long. "Jibril," she said softly, "you're such a kind man. Amina is lucky to have you. Not every woman would recognize how special you are." Jibril stood abruptly, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. "Zainab, that's enough. I don't know what you're trying to do, but this isn't appropriate." Zainab blinked, feigning surprise. "I don't understand. I was just being friendly." "This isn't friendly," Jibril said firmly. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it needs to stop." Zainab's face darkened for a brief moment before she quickly replaced her expression with one of hurt. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, Jibril. That was never my intention." Jibril didn't respond. Instead, he walked out of the room, his frustration evident. Later that night, Jibril confronted Amina once again. "Amina, I need to talk to you about Zainab," he said, his tone serious. Amina, sitting on the edge of their bed, frowned. "Jibril, we've talked about this already. What now?" "She crossed the line tonight," Jibril said, his voice steady but firm. "I don't think she's just being friendly. I think she's trying to come between us." Amina sighed, shaking her head. "Jibril, she's my best friend. My sister. You must be misinterpreting her behavior. Zainab would never do anything to hurt me." Jibril's jaw tightened. "Amina, I wouldn't bring this up if it wasn't serious. She's been making inappropriate comments, and tonight she..." "Enough." Amina cut him off, her voice rising. "I know Zainab better than anyone. She's been nothing but supportive since she got here. Maybe you're the one who's misreading the situation." Jibril opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. He could see that Amina's loyalty to Zainab was unshakable, at least for now. "Fine," he said quietly. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Feeling cornered by Jibril's growing suspicions, Zainab decided it was time to take drastic action. The jealousy that had simmered in her heart had now boiled over, transforming into a dangerous obsession. She could no longer bear to watch Amina's perfect life unfold while her own remained stagnant. Something had to change, and she would make sure it did. The next morning, Zainab wandered through the bustling market, her eyes scanning the rows of vendors until she spotted a dimly lit stall tucked away in a corner. The air around it seemed heavier, almost suffocating, and the woman behind the counter had a presence that sent shivers down Zainab's spine. "Madam," Zainab said cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help." The woman, with piercing eyes and a sly smile, leaned forward. "What kind of help?" Zainab hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. "There's someone standing in the way of my happiness. I need them gone." The woman raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "Gone, you say? You mean to harm this person?" Zainab swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. Not harm. Just disrupt her life. I need her to lose everything she has so that she'll understand what it feels like." The woman chuckled darkly. "Oh, jealousy. It's a powerful thing, isn't it?" She reached under the counter and pulled out a small pouch filled with a powdery substance. "Sprinkle this where she sleeps, and her life will begin to unravel. But be warned, this kind of interference always comes with a price." "I'll pay it," Zainab said quickly, her desperation overriding any sense of caution. She handed over a wad of cash, her fingers trembling. "Very well," the woman said, handing her the pouch. "Use it wisely." As Zainab walked back to Amina's apartment, the weight of what she had just done pressed down on her. But she told herself it was necessary. She deserved happiness too, didn't she? And if Amina had to lose hers for Zainab to gain hers, so be it. That night, while Amina and Jibril were asleep, Zainab crept into their room. Her hands shook as she opened the pouch and sprinkled the powder under their bed, whispering a quiet prayer, not to protect, but to destroy. As she slipped back into her own room, a dark satisfaction settled over her. Amina's perfect picture was about to shatter, and Zainab would make sure she was there to pick up the pieces. The web tightens. Amina woke up one morning with a nagging feeling that something was amiss. Jibril, who was usually attentive and warm, had been distant lately. He wasn't unkind, but his once easy smiles felt strained, his laughter less frequent. He spent more time at work and avoided long conversations, leaving Amina to wonder if she had done something wrong. At first, she dismissed it as stress. Jibril's job was demanding, and she assumed he just needed space. But as the days passed, the distance between them grew, and Amina couldn't ignore it anymore. She tried to bring it up one evening while they were eating dinner. "Jibril, is everything okay? You've been quiet lately," she asked, her tone gentle. Jibril looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "I'm fine, Amina. Just a lot on my mind." Amina frowned. "Is it work? Or is it us?" Jibril hesitated, his eyes flickering to Zainab, who was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said finally. "I'll handle it." His words did little to ease Amina's worry. She glanced at Zainab, who looked up from her book and offered a small, sympathetic smile. "Jibril seems off," Amina said to her later that night as they sat together in her room. "Do you think he's upset with me?" Zainab placed a comforting hand on Amina's shoulder. "Oh, Amina, don't overthink it. Men can be so complicated sometimes. Maybe he's just feeling the pressure of the wedding and his job. You've done nothing wrong." Amina sighed, leaning back against the bed. "I hope you're right. I just don't want to lose him." Zainab's grip on her shoulder tightened briefly before she let go. "You won't, Amina. You're perfect for him." But, she paused, biting her lip as if unsure whether to continue. "But what?" Amina asked, sitting up straighter. "Well," Zainab hesitated, her voice soft and hesitant. "I don't mean to worry you, but sometimes I wonder if Jibril truly appreciates everything you do for him. I've seen how hard you work to keep him happy, and I just don't know if he puts in the same effort." Amina's eyes widened. "Zainab, what are you saying?" "Jibril loves me." "I know he does." "Of course he does," Zainab said quickly, her tone soothing. "I'm just saying you deserve someone who sees all the little things you do and values you for them. That's all." The words lingered in Amina's mind long after Zainab left the room. She tried to shake them off, but doubts began to creep in. Was Zainab right? Was she giving more to the relationship than Jibril? The thought unsettled her, but she pushed it aside, determined not to let it affect her. Meanwhile, Jibril's unease around Zainab grew. Her presence in their home felt invasive, and her comments, always cloaked in concern, seemed designed to drive a wedge between him and Amina. He tried to talk to Amina about it again, but her loyalty to Zainab remained unshaken. "Jibril, I don't understand why you're so fixated on this," Amina said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Zainab has been nothing but kind and supportive. She's my best friend. Can't you just try to get along with her?" Jibril sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about getting along, Amina. There's something off about her. The way she talks to you, the way she acts around me, it's not normal." "You're imagining things," Amina said firmly. "I think you're letting your stress cloud your judgment." Jibril opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. He could see that Amina wasn't ready to hear it. For now, he decided to keep his distance from Zainab and focus on protecting his relationship. But Zainab had no intention of backing down. Her jealousy had evolved into a dangerous obsession, and she was determined to destroy the life Amina had built. Late one night, after Amina and Jibril had gone to bed, Zainab slipped out of the apartment and made her way to a dimly lit part of the city. The narrow alley was lined with makeshift stalls and shadowy figures, their voices low and hushed. Zainab's heart pounded as she approached a man sitting at a small table, his face partially hidden by the brim of a hat. He looked up as she approached, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're looking for something," he said, his voice a low growl. Zainab nodded, her hands trembling. I need someone to disappear." The man raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "That's a heavy request. You sure you're ready for the consequences?" "Yes," Zainab said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll pay whatever it takes." The man studied her for a moment before nodding. "Fine. Give me the details." Zainab described Amina's routine, her workplace, and the times she usually returned home. Each word felt like a knife twisting in her chest, but she pushed the guilt aside. This was the only way to have the life she believed she deserved. The man leaned forward, his expression serious. "This isn't a game, lady. Once we start, there's no turning back." "I understand," Zainab said, her voice cold. "Just get it done." As she walked back to the apartment that night, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. But she told herself it was necessary. Amina had everything: love, success, happiness, and it wasn't fair. Zainab deserved a chance to be happy too, no matter the cost. In her mind, the web was tightening around Amina. And soon, there would be no way out. A twisted revelation. The night was darker than usual as Amina walked home from her office, the dim glow of streetlights barely illuminating her path. She had stayed late to finish some wedding arrangements, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. The streets were quieter than usual, the hum of the city replaced by an eerie stillness that made her quicken her pace. She was only a few blocks from home when she heard footsteps behind her. At first, she dismissed them, assuming it was just another pedestrian. But the sound grew louder, closer, and she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw the silhouettes of 3 men approaching her with purposeful strides. "Who's there?" Amina called, her voice steady despite the rising fear in her chest. Before she could react, strong hands grabbed her from behind, pulling her into a narrow alley. She struggled, kicking and screaming, but the men were too strong. "Please, let me go," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have much money, but you can take it all." The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his face, chuckled darkly. "This isn't about money," he said, his voice cold. "Someone paid us to make sure you disappear." Amina froze, her heart pounding. "Who?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who would do this to me?" The man leaned closer, his scarred face illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby street lamp. "Your best friend says hello," he sneered. Time seemed to stop. Amina's mind reeled, the words echoing in her head. "Zainab," she whispered, disbelief washing over her like a cold wave. "No, you're lying. She would never." The men laughed, their cruel voices cutting through the night. "She paid well," the leader said. "Apparently, she's tired of living in your shadow." Amina's chest tightened as betrayal and heartbreak overwhelmed her. Her tears fell freely now, but she refused to let despair consume her. Summoning every ounce of strength, she kicked one of the men in the knee, causing him to stumble. In the chaos, she broke free and ran, her legs carrying her faster than she thought possible. "Get her," one of the men shouted, but before they could give chase, a voice rang out from the end of the alley. "Hey! What's going on here?" A burly man in a security uniform stepped into view, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The attackers hesitated for a moment before fleeing into the night. Amina collapsed to the ground, her body shaking as the security guard rushed to her side. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked, helping her to her feet. I think so," Amina stammered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." The man escorted her home, ensuring she was safe before leaving. As Amina stepped into her apartment, her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Zainab, the woman she had trusted with her life, had orchestrated her attack. The next morning, Amina sat silently in the living room, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Jibril entered the room, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Amina, what happened?" he asked, concern etched across his face. Amina handed him a small pouch of powder she had found under their bed the night before, evidence of Zainab's sinister actions. "It's Zainab," she said, her voice hollow. She's been trying to destroy us." Jibril's eyes widened in shock. "What are you talking about?" Amina recounted the events of the previous night, her voice trembling as she relived the horror. When she finished, Jibril's expression darkened with fury. "She's been manipulating us this whole time," he said, his fist clenched. "I knew something was off about her." Before long, Zainab emerged from her room, oblivious to the storm awaiting her. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, but her smile faded as she noticed their cold stares. "Sit down, Zainab," Amina said, her tone ice cold. Zainab hesitated, her smile faltering. "What's going on?" "Last night, I was attacked," Amina began, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "The men told me you sent them." Zainab's eyes widened, her face pale. "Amina, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Amina snapped, standing up. "I trusted you, Zainab. I treated you like my sister, and you tried to destroy my life." "Why?" Tears welled up in Zainab's eyes as she shook her head. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. I was jealous, Amina. You have everything, success, love, happiness, and I have nothing. I just wanted a chance to be happy too." Jibril stepped forward, his anger boiling over. "You think jealousy justifies betrayal? You put Amina's life in danger, Zainab. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'm sorry," Zainab whispered, her tears falling freely now. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I felt so small compared to her." Amina stared at her, her heart breaking all over again. "You didn't just hurt me, Zainab. You broke my trust. I can't even look at you right now." Jibril pointed to the door. "You need to leave. Now. You're not welcome here anymore." Zainab looked at Amina, silently pleading for forgiveness, but Amina turned away, unable to meet her gaze. Gathering her belongings, Zainab left the apartment, her shoulders slumped and her heart heavy with regret. As the door closed behind her, Amina sank into the couch, tears streaming down her face. Jibril sat beside her, wrapping her in his arms. "It's over now," he said softly. "She's gone." But for Amina, the pain of betrayal lingered. Zainab had been more than a friend, she had been family. And now, that bond was shattered, leaving behind a wound that would take a long time to heal. Lessons from the ashes. The days following Zainab's departure were quiet but heavy. The once warm and lively atmosphere in the apartment was now subdued, as though the betrayal had cast a lingering shadow. Amina spent hours staring out of the window, her mind replaying the events over and over. How had it come to this? How had her bond with Zainab, the woman she had trusted with her heart, unraveled into something so dark? Jibril, ever patient and supportive, stayed by her side. He knew the wounds ran deep, and though the immediate danger was gone, the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. "Take your time," he told her one evening as they sat on the couch. "We've been through a storm, but we are still standing. That's what matters." Amina nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude but also sadness. "I just don't understand, Jibril," she said, her voice breaking. "How could she do this? She was my best friend, my sister. I trusted her with everything." Jibril took her hand in his grip firm yet gentle. "Some people let their insecurities consume them. Zainab didn't know how to deal with her feelings, and instead of being honest, she chose to act out of jealousy. But that's not on you, Amina. You gave her nothing but kindness. Her actions are her own." Amina wanted to believe him, but the betrayal still stung. She spent weeks piecing herself back together, focusing on rebuilding her life with Jibril. Slowly but surely, they found their rhythm again. Jibril made it his mission to remind her of the love and stability they shared, planning small surprises, cooking dinner with her, and making her laugh when she needed it most. Amina leaned on him more than ever, but she also began to look inward, reflecting on the lesson this painful chapter had taught her. She realized that while trust and loyalty were invaluable, they could be dangerous when given to the wrong person. Far away, Zainab wandered the streets of a city that no longer felt like a place of opportunity. She rented a small, dingy room in a crowded neighborhood. Her once bright dreams now faded into a haze of regret. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a stone, and she couldn't escape the memory of Amina's face the night of the confrontation, betrayed, heartbroken, and devastated. Zainab had told herself it was jealousy, that she deserved the piece of the happiness Amina had so effortlessly attained. But now, sitting alone in the silence of her tiny room, she realized the truth: it wasn't just envy. It was her own refusal to confront her insecurities, her inability to celebrate someone else's success without feeling diminished. She thought about the life she had destroyed, not just Amina's but her own. The friendship she had cherished was gone, and no amount of apologies could undo the damage she had caused. "What have I done?" she whispered into the emptiness, her tears soaking the pillow beneath her. For the first time, she faced the full weight of her choices and the reality that she might never be forgiven. Months later, Amina and Jibril stood hand in hand on the balcony of their apartment, looking out at the city lights. The wedding was smaller than originally planned, but it had been perfect, a celebration of love that had survived the harshest of trials. They had chosen to keep the guest list intimate, leaving no room for memories of the past to cloud their future. As the cool breeze swept through, Amina turned to Jibril and smiled. "We made it," she said softly. "We did," Jibril replied, his gaze steady and full of love. "Together." That night, as Amina sat by the window, she picked up a journal and began to write. She needed to document what had happened, not just for herself but for anyone who might one day find themselves in her shoes. Her words poured out like a river, raw and honest. "This is a story of love, friendship, and betrayal, a lesson I never thought I'd have to learn. I once believed that trust was unshakable, that loyalty was forever, and that the people closest to you would always have your best interest at heart. But life taught me differently. Jealousy is a dangerous seed. When planted in the heart, it grows into a vine that strangles everything in its path. It blinds, corrupts, and destroys. I learned this the hard way, at the hands of someone I loved like a sister. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this: cherish your relationships, but protect them. Look for the cracks, the signs that something isn't right. And when you see them, don't ignore them. Love is worth fighting for, but not at the cost of losing yourself." And to Zainab, wherever you are, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I hope you find your way, just as I found mine. Amina closed the journal and placed it on the table, exhaling deeply. Her heart felt lighter, her resolve stronger. The betrayal had hurt, but it hadn't broken her. It had made her wiser, more aware of the fragility of trust, and more determined to protect the love she and Jibril shared. As she climbed into bed beside Jibril, Amina felt a sense of closure. The ashes of her past had settled, and from them, she was ready to build something new, something stronger, more beautiful, and more resilient than ever before.